Hi, I'm Desi Cerna. Welcome to Fretboard Theory Volume II, the video edition. In this program, I guide you through every chapter in the book, teach on all the main concepts, and play through many of the examples, including some new ones. Here's what you'll learn. Chapter 1 explains different ways musicians refer to a song's key. You receive additional insight on keys, modes, and key signatures. Chapter 2 shows how musicians analyze chord progressions starting from a song's tonal center rather than from its parent major scale. Chapter 3 demonstrates the use of dominant function and voice leading in both major and harmonic minor songs. Chapter 4 reveals the most common ways that songs change keys and combine scales, including modulations, borrowed chords, and modal interchange. Chapter 5 teaches how to fill the gaps between chords with chromatic passing chords, diminished chords, and augmented chords. Chapter 6 explores skills useful to lead guitarists. You learn how lead patterns can be used to narrow your focus to a few essential pentatonic positions. Chapter 7 simplifies the use of major scale patterns and modes by playing them as part of the lead patterns taught in Chapter 6. Chapter 8 uses arpeggios to target chord tones, outline chords and chord progressions while playing lead lines. Chapter 9 adds some exotic flair to your melodies and solos with harmonic minor scale patterns. Chapter 10 introduces you to pedal tones and pedal point, composition techniques that use repeated and sustained notes to create rich-sounding harmonies and musical textures. And finally, Chapter 11 wraps up the program. Since I'll be referring to the text and figures in the book, I recommend that you have a copy of it on hand as you follow the video lessons. I've got a copy on hand myself, along with some extra notes, and you'll see me refer to it as I teach. Playing examples in some chapters feature the use of tracks. Sometimes these tracks were played on my Boss loop station, which I'll show you in a second, and other times I simply played them on my phone. Some of these tracks were made by simply pre-recording a guitar part, while other tracks were made with an audio program or from a MIDI file. In some cases, I just found a free track on the internet. It's a good idea for you to practice playing along with tracks too, and I recommend that you familiarize yourself with some of the programs that can be used to make tracks, or at the very least, get a looping device. The information in this program is suitable for intermediate level players and up, and I am assuming that you are already familiar with the concepts taught in the first volume of Fretboard Theory. You can follow along with these lessons using either an electric or an acoustic guitar in standard tuning. I'm playing a Paul Reed Smith P22, which is equipped with both magnetic pickups and also a piezo pickup in the bridge, which I'll be using for acoustic guitar sounds. I'm plugged into a Fender Bandmaster VM amp head, which is then plugged into a Rivera Silent Sister isolation cabinet with a Celestion Vintage 30 speaker. For distortion, I have a Visual Sound Son of Hyde. For overdrive, a Visual Sound Open Road, and I occasionally run both those pedals together. For delay, a Visual Sound Dual Tap Delay, and for looping, a Boss RC3. I occasionally use the amp's built-in chorus. Both my electric and acoustic guitar sounds feature a plate reverb from my Alesis mixer. And now we're ready to begin. So grab your guitar, get your book, set up, tune up, and let's get started. Welcome to Chapter 1. What is the key of a song? In this chapter, we're going to talk about tonics, keys, relative major and minor, modes, accidentals, and key signatures. And we're going to get started with tonics. The tonic is the primary pitch of a scale, of a chord progression, or of a piece of music. Now, in my first volume of Fretboard Theory, I often use the word root when I referred to the root chord in a progression. But actually, root refers to the primary pitch in a triad or a chord, and tonic is the more appropriate term to use when you're talking about the primary pitch in a scale or a chord progression or a piece of music. So music always has a primary pitch to it, and so does a chord progression. So you might have a chord progression with a handful of chords, but there's always going to be one chord that everything seems to come back to and resolve. For example, this chord progression here. I use G, E minor, C, and D, but G is really kind of the home base. It's the primary chord where everything comes back to and resolves. So you'd call that the tonic. And likewise, when you play the scale, you hear the G as the tonic in the scale. Okay, so every piece of music always has a primary pitch. And generally speaking, that's what people mean when they refer to a song's key. If they say a song's in the key of G or the key of C or the key of D, what they mean is the primary pitch is G, the primary pitch is C, the primary pitch is D, and so on. Perhaps they might say this song's in the key of E minor or A minor. In that case, they are indicating the primary pitch in the music, and they're also indicating that the tonality is minor, or the primary chord is minor. And this brings us to our next subject, which is relative major and relative minor. You know that the major scale has 7 degrees, and any one could function as the tonal center, as the tonic. And you get the different modes, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, and so on. The 2 most common modes are definitely the first one, Ionian, and the 6th one, Aeolian. And they are referred to as the relative major and the relative minor. So for example, using the G major scale and the chords, the first chord is G. And if you're playing a piece of music that centers on G, it may have other chords in there, but if it centers on G, you consider it to be G Ionian mode. And if you center a piece of music on the 6th chord, E minor, then you would call that E Aeolian mode. And these two scales are considered to be the plain or natural scales, and usually the modal names aren't used. Musicians are going to just call it G major. They're usually not going to say Ionian mode. And likewise, they'll usually just call this E minor. They wouldn't say Aeolian mode. So the G scale is considered a plain major scale, and the E scale is considered a natural minor scale. It's usually when music centers on one of the other degrees in the scale that musicians consider it to be modal. Technically, major and minor are also modal, but that's not always how musicians think of it. So this is called the relative major and the relative minor. And this is true in all keys, that the 1st degree and the 6th degree produce the relative major and the relative minor. So for example, let's say you're in the C major scale, and you're using C chords. If you're centering on the 1st C, that's considered the plain or relative major. And if you're centering on the 6th, A minor, that's considered the natural minor. And the same is true in all keys. Not only are the 1st and 6th modes the most common, but actually most musicians always think of music as being in either the relative major or the relative minor. Traditionally speaking, music publishers will usually ignore a song's mode and notate everything as if it's in a relative major or relative minor. If a piece of music centers on a major chord, then it's considered to be the relative major, the plain major scale, even if there's something else, even if there's another mode involved. Likewise, if something centers on a minor chord, then it's considered to be in the natural minor scale, even if it's actually one of the other minor modes. So let me give you some examples. We're going to analyze some sample progressions taken from some songs, and we're going to look at how most musicians would traditionally look at them, but then we're also going to analyze them and see what's really going on, because there's always more to the story than what the key indicates. So let me give you some examples. I'm going to play 3 songs that are all said to be in the key of F because they all center on an F chord. The first one is based on The Lion Sleeps Tonight by the Tokens, and it sounds like this. Because this music centers on an F major chord, musicians would say it's in the key of F major. Okay, the next example sounds like this. This is based on the song Tequila by the Champs. It also centers on an F major, so musicians would also say it's in the key of F major. Okay, and the third example is based on Dreams by Fleetwood Mac. I actually opened up with a progression based on this. It uses an F and a G, and because it starts on F, most musicians would say it's in the key of F. So I've given you 3 examples that musicians would all say are in the key of F. But now let's go back and analyze them, and let's see what's really going on here, because there's more at play. In the first example, which was based on The Lion Sleeps Tonight, you had F, B flat, and C. And hopefully you can see that these 3 chords are 1, 4, and 5 right out of the F major scale. Okay, so no surprise there. That's what we expected. It is in the key of F after all. Okay, let's go to the next one, the sample that was based on Tequila. This uses the chords F and E flat. So already we have a problem here because this song is said to be in the key of F, which implies the F major scale. However, the F major scale has an E natural in it, not an E flat. That's E natural. There's an E flat. So this cannot come from the F major scale. You've got 2 major chords a whole step apart. Whenever you have 2 major chords a whole step apart, they are usually 4 and 5 from the major scale because that's the only place in the major scale, chords 4 and 5, where you have 2 major chords. So if E flat is 4 and F is 5, that means that B flat is 1. So this chord progression is actually drawn from the B flat major scale. So Tequila's chords and notes are actually drawn from the B flat major scale. But you're centering on the 5th degree F, producing F Mixolydian mode. So if you were to say that this song is in the key of F major, implies the F major scale, but is actually drawn from the B flat major scale, it's F Mixolydian mode. Now, here's the deal. Musicians are not likely to tell you that. They're just going to say it's in F major, because when musicians refer to the key of a song, they are usually just referring to the primary pitch or chord. Any other details about the music that you'll need to figure out on your own. So normally the key implies a major scale. If there's another mode at play, it's up to you to figure out. In fact, even music publishers will ignore modes and notate everything as if it were a plain major scale or plain minor. So if you find the sheet music for a piece of music like Tequila here, it's likely that the key signature will indicate the F major scale. And then whenever any notes in the music fall outside of the key signature, they will have to be corrected with flat or sharp signs. Those are called accidentals. So for example, Tequila would probably use an F major scale key signature, which includes an E natural, but then every time an E flat note or chord comes up in the music, it's going to have a little flat sign cueing you, the player, to actually play an E flat. That's just the way that music publishers do it. Let's go to that third example I gave you, which was based on Dreams by Fleetwood Mac. I'm using an F and a G chord. I like to wrap my hand, and I play the first string open. So technically I have F major 7 and G6. So right away we have two major chords a whole step apart. When that happens, it's usually always going to be chords 4 and 5. So if F is 4 and G is 5, that means that C is 1. This progression is actually drawn from the C major scale, but it's starting on the 4th degree F. So you could consider it F Lydian mode. Most musicians are going to tell you, Dreams, oh yeah, it's in the key of F because they're referring to the primary chord. Often musicians will just name the key after whatever chord is first. So in this case, since F is first, they're going to say it's in the key of F. That implies the F major scale, but as I just pointed out, the notes and chords are actually drawn from the C major scale. It's possible that you would see this song notated with an F major key signature as well, and then accidentals used throughout the song. Now, every once in a while, I do come across a score where the publisher did actually put the key signature for the proper parent major scale. So you might see that now and then. Perhaps it would be an F major, it would be like a C major key signature, and there might even be a performance note that says F major tonality, or maybe even F Lydian mode. Likewise, on the tequila example, if a song's in F mixolydian mode, you might actually see a B flat key signature, and then a little performance note that says F major tonality or F mixolydian mode. Don't count on it, because usually you don't see that sort of thing, but I do come across it every once in a while. Okay, so I just gave you 3 examples of songs that are all said to be in the key of F, but they were actually drawn from 3 different major scales. Now I want to give you some examples of songs that are all said to be in the key of E minor, but they actually are all drawn on different major scales too. And I'm going to start with a little riff that's similar to the Bon Jovi song, Living on a Prayer. Okay, so the overall tonality here is E minor. So people would say it's in the key of E minor. Okay, let me give you another example now. This one sounds like this. That's based on A Horse with No Name by America, which centers on an E minor chord. Some musicians would say it's in the key of E minor. Okay, here's one more example, also based on an E minor tonality, and it sounds like this. That's based on War by Joe Satriani. Okay, so all of these songs are said to be in the key of E minor. That's typically how musicians would describe them. Let's go back and let's analyze them now and see what's really going on. So in the first example, which was similar to Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi, it's based on the chords C, D, and E minor. And I played them with power chords. And those chords do indeed fit in the E natural minor scale, which is relative to G, so you'd know them as 4, 5, and 6. So no surprise there. We expected that. If you say E minor, we'd think the E minor scale. Okay, the next example, Horse with No Name by America, I used a form of E minor and F sharp minor. I actually used an F sharp minor 11. I fingered it like this. But let's just simplify this and just think E minor and F sharp minor. 2 minor chords a whole step apart. The only place where that occurs in a major scale is between chords 2 and 3. So if E minor is 2 and F sharp minor is 3, go backward. What's a whole step below E? D. these chords are actually drawn from the D major scale. If it makes it easier for you, you could play them as bar chords here. E minor, F sharp minor, and there's D. So think D major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you're centering on the second degree E minor, which produces E Dorian mode. So this song is in E Dorian mode. And let's go to the third example, War by Joe Satriani. In that example, I used, it's based on an E minor and an F. Okay, so right away, you should figure out that, well, it can't be E Dorian mode because we'd have an F sharp in there, not an F natural. And it can't be the E natural minor scale because we'd have an F sharp in there too. So when do you have a minor chord and then a major chord a half step higher? And the answer is when you're using 3 and 4. E minor and F are chords 3 and 4 out of the C major scale. So this is actually an E Phrygian mode. Notes and chords from the C major scale, but you're centering on the third degree E, producing Phrygian mode. So we have 3 songs that are all said to be in the key of E minor, which implies E natural minor, but actually these examples were all drawn from a different major scale. The first one was indeed natural minor. The second one was actually E Dorian, and the third one was E Phrygian. And in cases like this, it's really up to you to figure it out, because musicians are just going to say, yeah, this song's an E minor. They might even say, this song's just, it's in the key of E. They may not even actually indicate whether it's major or minor. You have to figure it out. And music publishers are likely going to take songs like this, and they're going to notate them all with the same key signature. They're going to use an E minor key signature. That would actually be the G major key signature, because they're relative to one another. And then if any notes fall outside of the E natural minor scale, then they will be corrected with the use of accidentals, flat or sharp signs. Let's take some other things into consideration. Sometimes musicians will call the key off of the first chord, even if the music really centers on something else. And a good example of this might be Sweet Home Alabama by Lynyrd Skynyrd. That song starts on D. You've got a D in there, a C add 9, and a G. So most musicians will say, yeah, it's in the key of D, because, well, D is first, and they usually just go off of what's first. But you know, if you listen to that song, the majority of the guitar solos are actually based in the G major pentatonic. You spend more time on G than the other chords. So overall, it works for G to kind of be the tonal center. Right? So you could look at that as being in the key of G. You could look at it as being in the key of D, because that's first. You could probably expect people to refer to it in both ways. Something else to take into consideration. Sometimes music will center on a major chord, but because there are minor melodies or minor guitar solos, then some people might think it's in a minor key. So an example of this might be Pride and Joy by Stevie Ray Vaughan. It actually is centered on an E major chord. So for that reason, guitarists might say it's in the key of E. But most of the guitar solos are actually in the E minor pentatonic. So some musicians might call it the key of E minor, because they're thinking about the scales that they're playing. Another good example would be Give Me One Reason by Tracy Chapman, which appears to be a 1-4-5 chord progression in the key of F sharp. Sounds like this. so most musicians would say it's in the key of F sharp major. However, most of the guitar solos and even the vocal melody itself is using minor intervals and minor pentatonic scales. So some musicians, or maybe even a vocalist, might consider that to be in the key of F sharp minor. And finally, one more thing to take into consideration when you're trying to determine a song's key is that a song may be based on incomplete chords or an incomplete scale, so you really don't have enough to go on in order to try to piece together a full major scale. So a good example of this would be the opening riff to Whole Lotta Love by Led Zeppelin. If you're dealing with a song like that, and if that's all you had to go by, you really don't have enough notes to try to piece together a full parent major scale and determine what the proper, key is. Most musicians would say it's in the key of E because it does center on an E pitch. And it uses an E power chord. It's not major or minor, so it's difficult to determine whether it's even major or minor. The only other note in that riff that's not in the power chord is the D, a flat 7. So that's all you have to go on. You've got a root, a fifth, and a flat 7th. So we can't really determine whether it's major or whether it's minor, and we certainly can't piece together a full parent major scale. So that happens sometimes. It's not always possible to fit a piece of music into a full parent major scale. Or you might have a piece of music that's just using a power chord and maybe even just some chromatic movement, something like that is obviously not based on a full major scale or a full mode, and it doesn't really make sense to try to fit it into one. This concludes Chapter 1, What is the Key of a Song? So hopefully now you understand that the key really just tells you what the tonic or the primary pitch or possibly the primary chord is in a piece of music. If a song is said to be in the key of G, that implies the G major scale, and it may very well be the G major scale, but it could be a Lydian mode, it could be Mixolydian mode, there could be something else at play, and it's up to you to figure that out. Or a song could be said to be in a minor key like E minor, which implies the E natural minor scale, Aeolian mode, but it might actually be one of the other minor modes. Again, it's up to you to figure it out. Even the sheet music may actually use a key signature indicating plain major or natural minor when another mode is at play, and then accidentals are used to correct any notes in the score. Now, one final thing I should probably mention is that musicians have different ways of thinking about things. Some people are more knowledgeable about theory and key signatures and major scales than others, and you just want to make sure that you're careful to avoid any arguments or adding to any confusion. The end justifies the means. So if you got a band together and you guys are all on the same page musically and you're playing the right chord progression and the right notes and it sounds good, then you don't need to fuss about whether or not the key is technically or theoretically correct or whether someone's perspective on the music should be different. So sometimes it's best to just shut up, play your guitar, and work out these technical details on your own and just play. Okay, in the next chapter, Chapter 2, you're going to take a look at renumbering scales, chords, and chord progressions. In other words, what you're going to do is you're going to renumber chords by their tonic rather than sticking with the number system from their parent major scale. And this information is necessary in order to get into more advanced music theory concepts, specifically key changes, modal interchange, borrowed chords, which come up later in this video program.